Hello there, it's Trisha. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and to my stop on the Exotic Garden blog hop for Altenew. Today I'll be featuring the Bitterroot Flower Layering Stencil and the matching die. And I think on the die you can really get a good look at how beautiful this group of flowers is going to be when it's all done. So this is a 3-part stencil, but it's more than 3 layers. There are multiple layers on each stencil piece, so I'll show you what I mean as we go. The 2 flowers and the group of buds on the first stencil are meant to be inked together. So I'm going to show you a little trick to help you easily identify which of the stencil openings are intended to be inked together. And I'm sorry that my video is a little bit blown out here. I guess I've got it overexposed, so when my hand comes into the frame and creates a shadow, you can see a little better. But what I'm trying to share is the first layer is a single solid flower. But I don't want to start with that because I want to know how my whole composition is going to be on my card panel. So this flower that I'm pointing at now is layer 1, but I am going to start with layer 2. I've got a piece of Nina Solar White, and this is A2 sized, or just a tad smaller than that. And I am using the Shades of Purple ink set. And my first color is Soft Lilac. But I want to start by inking the second layer. So see here, the first layer is just 1 flower. And the second layer has both flowers and the bud, and I want to know where all that's going to land on my card because this is going to be a 1-layer card. So I'm using the soft lilac, but I'm being kind of generous. Like I'm giving this a medium application, I would say, so that I can go back and do a lighter layer for that first flower. So I'm going all over the openings that go with this cluster. So again, the 2 larger blooms and the 2 little buds. Now I can go back to that first solid layer on the lowest bloom there. It's really easy to line up with that detail layer. I lay it over the top, so I'm kind of doing this in backwards order. And then I can put a nice soft application of that soft lilac over the top, and I think you can see it a little bit better in this shot. And now it's going to fill in that first flower for me. So what's happening in this stencil is the base layer for your 2 flowers is different. The lightest color on the first flower doesn't exist in the second flower grouping. So I'm moving on to the second stencil piece, and I'm labeling mine with a Sharpie. That helps me figure out where to start when I'm doing the cluster. And then it gets really easy from there because you line up those 2 buds, and then there's outside edges of those flowers that line up just perfectly, and it just sort of snaps into place. So now I'm moving on to the Lavender Fields ink, which is the slightly darker in this set. And I am using, for the first time, I am using the mini ink blending brushes from Altenew. I finally got my hands on some of these, and oh my gosh, I love them. They're the perfect size. It's really easy to control where you're going, and they really get into every little nook and cranny. You see how tiny some of those little spots are. And I like it because you don't want to press really hard, or you'll snag some of that little detail and bend the plastic. So you just want to have a nice light hand, and those brushes are perfect for this. So now I'm going on to the next layer, and this is the Deep Iris. And this will be the finest detail on that lower left flower, and then some more detail on the buds and the top flower that I'm working on now. I'm sorry that my video is a little bouncy. I'm kind of pouncing my blending brush to make sure the bristles get right down into the nooks and crannies of all that cool detail. So there is one more layer that doesn't touch the bottom flower. It only touches the larger bloom and the buds, and that is on stencil piece number 3. And again, I'm labeling those because it just helps me like quick reference. I feel like it's a little hack to um, help me know where to get started and how to line things up. Plus it tells me what the front of the stencil is versus the back. If I keep them all lined up the same direction, like with my numbers facing up, then I know the pieces will all line up. So for this layer, I'm using the darkest color in the set, which is that Midnight Violet, although I'm using a pretty light application of it. This introduces a lot of color over the top of that second full bloom, and I didn't want it to be overly dark. So there was one stencil opening that I did not mask off. I knew I should have, and I didn't. But I got a little bit, excuse me, a little bit of an ink smudge there, and I have a little sand eraser, and you can kind of buff that right out. So on the third stencil piece, you also have 2 layers for all the leaves. And they nestle right in between. So I'm pausing the video here for a second. You can see when my hand's there where those leaves nestle in, and there's spots at the base of the buds to line it up with, and also between the flowers where it lines up really easily. So for this, I'm using 2 colors of green ink. I'm using Parrot and Moss inks. And that first layer is the Parrot. I really do need to fix my camera mount so it doesn't jiggle around so much. I apologize. It looks a little like electric yellow right now, so I'm going to go over that with a light layer of the moss all over it just to kind of tone that down. So I just circled with a Sharpie the leaf grouping, and now I have circled the floral grouping, and then that leaves it obvious for me what I have left for the second layer of my leaves. So you can see on one stencil here, I have 3 different layers to ink that are intended to be inked with the same color and at the same time. So by grouping them with my Sharpie, I know which ones to arrange or align on top of each other for each different layer. So right now I am using the moss ink for the second layer of my leaves. And that's going to give some definition and detail to those pretty leaves. So I decided to go back to my other 2 stencils and do the same thing and just group them with a Sharpie. I didn't have any trouble with smearing when I inked, but just be aware of that, be cautious. Make sure that you're using something permanent and try to give yourself as much space so you're not inking or smearing that. But this worked out really well for me. So back on stencil piece number 2, you have the 2 centers of the flowers. So I'm just circling back to that, and I'm using a heavier application of that Midnight Violet to put the deepest color right in the center of the flowers. If you're enjoying this video, I would love it if you would click here to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you are aware when I post something new. So let's move on to the dies. There is one die that cuts out the entire cluster as I have inked it. However, there are a couple of other stencil openings. There's little like silhouettes, they're like little sprigs or buds. They are not part of the main die. So if you ink them as part of your main image, they will not cut out with the die. But there are separate dies to cut them out and add them separately as their own layers. So I'll show you here in a second. Those 2 little pieces are for those little buds. And then there's also a die for each of the main blooms. So you could cut those out separately and layer them up, or you could forego their composition altogether and just ink up those blooms and create your own cluster. So lots of options. For me today, what I'm going to do is take the main die, the largest one, and I'm cutting from a separate piece of cardstock to be a mask. So I've sprayed that with a little bit of pixie spray, and it looks like there's nothing there, but what I've done is just cover all my inking with that die cut mask. And I am going to ink around the whole perimeter of that mask with some warm sunshine ink. And I'm kind of making it a little darker closest to the edge and then fading it out towards the outside of the panel. And you can see when I peel this off, what I'm going for is sort of a glow or like a halo behind these flowers. Another little tip, if you ever have an image that, or a spot on your card that you need to fill in that didn't get inked, like in this case, I have a gap between my ink blended yellow and the flowers themselves. So I'm just taking a little blender pen and some ink that I've put onto a clear block, and I can just tap that into those white areas, and that works out great. Then I smushed a little of that ink onto a clear block, and I'm splattering it onto my card background. So at some point my camera turned off, and unfortunately I missed the footage of finishing up this card, but it was just a few details. I've just added a sentiment strip right across the middle that's white heat embossed on a black strip, and drew a few little framing lines in opposite corners there, and then just put a few crystal droplets for a little touch of bling. I popped that all up onto an A2 card base. So I wanted to take another look at the stencils because they have packed so much great detail into these 3 stencils. I did find it was easier for me to quickly identify which clusters went together. So like by drawing these circles around, it helps me know how to layer up the groups of flowers so that they all align perfectly. And it just saves me from kind of having to mess around with it and figure out which goes where. However, if you want to ink up just the individual blooms, because remember in the die set, you have the single dies for just the individual blooms, so you could do these for your own composition. I labeled the blooms A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, so those are the 5 layers of the first bloom, and then the same thing for the second, B1, B2, B3, B4, B5. So if you want to pause the video and take a little screenshot and label your stencils the same way, maybe this would help you. I don't know. And again, you be a little careful that you're not smearing that black ink, but I just thought this might be a nice hack to help make sense of all the detail and all the awesome openings in this stencil, because I am just in love with the flowers that this makes. So I thought I would just show you a quick bonus and show you how to just do the individual stencils. So I'm starting with A1 as I've labeled it. I'm moving to A2. It lines up really easily. For the A1 layer, I did blush ink. For A2, I'm using the rouge ink. And then I can quickly scoot to my A3 opening, which is on the other stencil piece. And that also lines up really easily in the center. So for A3, I'm using a light application of Coral Berry. I'm jumping to another color family. I kind of love peaches and pinks together. And then again, I'm scooting right over to A4. And I tried to label mine so that the orientation of my letters, like where I wrote A4, was upright for all of the same, so they were all, I wouldn't have to rotate the stencil. Does that make sense? So they're all facing the same direction. If I put the A5 reading so I can read it, then it should be close to the right position. So A5, that's the 5th layer, and I'm just using that warm sunshine ink. And look how pretty that single bloom turns out. And now you could do a million different things with this, cut it out and use it on its own. And I will do exactly that and save this for another project. So thank you so much for checking out my stop on the blog hop. I hope that maybe you picked up some tips for using these stencils. I love these layering stencils. I just think Altenew is so ingenious, and they create these products that make you look like such an artist, don't they? It's awesome. Anyway, I hope you had some fun watching this video today and reading along on my blog. Make sure that you are checking out all the steps because there's so much incredible inspiration for all the wonderful products in this release. I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel and like this video, and I hope to see you again real soon.